bad.
What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo Varandas, also known as Ricky Varandas, and a great episode for you today. We have Dr. Lindsay. She's been on the Union of the Unwanted before with Dr. Robert Malone, so that giant roundtable with doctors. She was one of the contributors on that episode. Please check that out if you haven't listened to it. And I became aware of Dr. Lindsay through our mutual friend, Susie Olson, who was also on that Union episode with Dr. Robert Malone. And of course, this conversation is driven by the COVID topic because there's constantly things happening and things to talk about and report on and new research. So hopefully you guys enjoy this conversation. And now the business part, right? This is a Valley for Valley show. If you guys get some value out of these conversations, which I hope you do, and I know many of you do because you guys email me and write me and all that stuff, please try to give some value back. It doesn't have to be financially. Much like you guys listening, I am also tight on money much of my life, so it's completely understandable if you listen to the show and you don't contribute financially. But please review the show, rate the show, thumbs up the show, go in the show description, find all the places you can find the Ripple Effect Podcast and subscribe to it. And hopefully all those little things will help fight back against the algorithms that I'm sure are shadow banning me and not letting new listeners find the show. And for some of you that have high-paying jobs and are doing financially well, consider giving something back. You can donate to the show using PayPal or crypto. You can support the show on Patreon. You could buy some merch. You can go to the Ripple Effect Podcast merch.com. That will take you directly to my store. Or you can go to rickyvarandas.com or the Ripple Effect Podcast.com, where you can find links to all the ways to support the show, my merch store, Patreon, all the things I mentioned. You can also find links to all my channels, all my shows, everything on there, uncensored. So if you're ever looking for a specific episode and you're having a hard time because big tech and shadow banning algorithms aren't pulling up the episode, go to my website. You'll find a search box in the top right-hand corner, and you can search any guest or episode you're looking for, and they will always be available on my website, uncensored. Last but not least, I have a new Telegram group chat. So if you go in the show description or if you go on my website and you go to contact, you'll find links to the Telegram group chat. And it's just a place where listeners of the show can connect, share research, share articles, talk about episodes that I'm doing. And I can also keep you guys updated on things. So if you want to connect with me, if you want to hear from me, check out the Telegram group chat. And remember, if you join us on Patreon, I do a Patreon podcast with my Patreon supporters. I try to do it once a month. So support me on Patreon and you'll be able to get the Zoom link and join us on the next Patreon podcast. We can chat about everything and anything, connect with other listeners. And if you're not a podcaster, it's a cool way of getting your voice on iTunes and Spotify and be able to listen to yourself, which some of you guys might enjoy. And that's it. Long intro, my apologies. Enjoy the show, and I will talk to you guys on the next one.
Hey, fine. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for being with me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Last time we saw each other, you were on the Dr. Malone episode on Union of the.
That's right. Yeah.
That was a good episode. I got a lot of positive feedback, and a lot of people, I think, they like to see that many doctors and people in that field all agreeing on the same things. And I give him a lot of credit, man. He's really active on Twitter. He's really active with doing interviews, and he's outspoken, and I feel like he wasn't in this world before, and now he's kind of, I guess he's been thrown into it. and he's fighting it head on. So I'm really excited when we get people like that on our team and on our side.
Yeah, I'm excited about that too. There are a couple areas where we have some disagreements. He's still advocating to give these shots to obese kids and to the elderly. And the data just really doesn't bear out that either of those populations could benefit from these at all. So I'm not really sure what's going on there. I know that he's also developing his own mRNA vaccine with DARPA. So, it really makes it difficult to be on the board of, hey, this may not be such a great technology to tamper with genetics and try to make these vaccines if you're also developing one, right? So yes, I'm very grateful that he is out there saying that these current formulations are not appropriate, but I really wish he'd say that they really are not appropriate for any population, as the data clearly shows.
Well, that's the thing that I mean, in a way, I feel like it benefits us and it hurts us. Like you said,
Right.
I agree with you. Like he shouldn't be recommending it for anybody, but I think for the person who is completely on the other side of the argument, having somebody who's not completely against vaccines, somebody who's actually been consultants and worked for vaccine companies and helped develop them, if he's saying that, hey, there should be concern for, for people younger and healthy should be concerned about this vaccine, I think that it makes it a little more digestible for people who, because he's not anti all vaccines, he's anti,
Right.
so I think but you're right. I mean, I think we talked about it when he was on the show on the Union of the Unwanted, that same type of thing where he kind of was still recommending it for older people. But the Colin Powell, that whole situation for me is like should open people's eyes, because they're contradicting themselves again. I mean, they're constantly contradicting themselves, but it's another perfect example of it, because the whole, like, everybody's saying, well, he had cancer and he had all these underlying issues. Well, that's exactly who we've been advertising this for mostly in the first place. So I'm like, how does that make any sense? So you're telling me that, like, people who have underlying issues and have health concerns, they're the ones who should get it because we should protect them from it. But then we're saying, like, hey, if you have underlying issues, the vaccine's not going to protect you, and maybe the vaccine could even be harmful. So it's like it doesn't make any sense. It's I mean, I'm a little worked up because just literally like 30 minutes ago or so, I got an email from the superintendent of the schools in the town that I live in Massachusetts. And they just talked about, they talked about in the email how they extended the mask mandates for kids till the 15th of January. And it's like, I'm like, are you effing kidding me? And they're like, oh, and then they go into how they only, we only have 80% or they need to wait till we have 80% of vaccinated kids before they can completely lift the mask mandates. And I actually, somebody from my town who's a listener of my show, he was like, why are they even talking about vaccination? He's like, why aren't they talking about cases? So he's like, they're basically showing their hand and saying, like, this isn't about cases. This isn't about the spread of the virus. We just want to vaccinate everybody, because not once do they mention, hey, if we have 80% vaccinated population, or if the cases go down to this whatever number, then we'll lift the mask mandate. But it's never like it. To me, it's frustrating because it's like, it's so obvious, and there's so many things that you could discuss, from like the suppression of medicines, from and treatments that could have saved lives, to so many different things that just it's like, it's obvious that the only thing they want to do is push a vaccine. Like, it's what it's about. It's about power. It's about profit. It's about control. And anybody who's still talking about this like it's a health issue, it's like, turn off your TV and look around. Are we in a pandemic? Because the pandemic we were sold were Chinese bodies in the streets and hospitals filled and all this stuff that never happened. And now it's like the war on drugs or the war on terror. It's like the war against a bad flu. It's like we're still fighting a war that is meaningless, useless, and a waste of our time. Sorry, I'm getting worked up a little bit at this.
No, I completely agree with you. I mean, if we're at a state where we're going to allow our children to be killed, frankly killed, buy a vaccine for disease for which they have statistically zero risk, and I really mean that, zero risk, then we're in a very dangerous place. These shots absolutely will. We have shown through estimates, we have shown through real life data that kids suffer a greater risk of developing myocarditis than they do, by 6 times than they do for even their risk of hospitalization with COVID. So we just know, and of course, the 5-year mortality risk for COVID is 50%, or it's not for COVID, sorry, for myocarditis is 50% in adults. We don't really have that data for kids because kids don't normally get myocarditis in large enough numbers for us to investigate that until now with these shots. We also know from the UK data that there is an inverse correlation now between the vaccinations and protection, right? So you're actually more at risk to develop COVID and die if you're vaccinated, if you're completely vaccinated. That's what the data is telling us. That's what nobody is paying attention to. They're still listening to the propaganda talking heads, the newspeak organizations, if we wanted to get into Orwellian comparisons. It's ridiculous. People need to stand up and protect their kids. And I don't know how, we don't know how to stop this. I think it's very, very important for people to understand, and I want to say this very clearly, that the top scientists and doctors in the world right now are all talking to each other, and we don't know how to stop this because the agencies and the regulatory agencies, the safety agencies that would typically regulate the health and safety of our kids, of us, of these products, and make sure that dangerous products did not make it to us, are captured. They're compromised. People need to understand this, that they will have to protect themselves and they will have to stand up. There is nobody that's going to swoop down and save you. We're trying, but that's where we are. And it's very scary. You guys can file a lawsuit, get the science. The science shows that masking doesn't work. The science shows that the more we vaccinate, the higher the case rate is globally. The most vaccinated countries have the highest case rates, have the highest COVID mortality rates. Vaccinate more, kill more people. That's just it. Those are the facts.
And there was a Johnson & Johnson study that, or an article about how Johnson & Johnson's vaccine is 3% effective at 6 months. I mean, it's so silly. I mean, you're talking about vaccines that were first advertised as 99% effective or 97% effective, which I thought was hilarious, because I'm like, anything under 99% effective should already be a red flag, because you have a 99% chance of getting COVID.
Right.
So I'm like, if it's only 97%, I'm like, so it's less than the placebo or the nothing. Like, it makes no sense. And then just how Israel is like a perfect example, because Israel is one of the most vaccinated countries, if not the most vaccinated country in the world. And you're seeing, and same thing with like the UK. Now you're starting to see just the percentage of people who are fully vaccinated that are passing away. And it's just so obvious the vaccine's not working. And if anything, it could be causing more harm than any good. And people need to see that. And I mean, to me, it's like, I think a lot of people just wanted to comply because they just wanted their life back. Like, they made life so miserable because we're social creatures, and we so wanted our lives back that it's like, okay, this vaccines are our path to normal again. Let me just get it out of the way. Yeah, maybe the science is fuzzy, maybe it's experimental technology, but I just want my life back. I want to travel, I want to do this, I want to do that. But what many of us have been saying, it's like, you can't comply because it's never ending. It's same thing with the mask thing. Like, I went to my school committee meetings and fought with the school committee, and they're like, oh no, we just want to mask the kids in the beginning of the school year, until the case numbers go down. I'm like, to what number? And they're like, well, we're not sure, like to just a number that we're happy. And it's like, okay, I'm like, this, once we give you this power, we're never going to get it back.
Because your school board has the scientific acumen to decide when the masks are working and when they're not.
Well, you know what drives me nuts about the mask thing is, like, even like, forget the fact that the box says on it that it doesn't stop the spread.
But it doesn't prevent the virus, right? Because it's 1,000 times,
Yeah.
bigger than the
So
virus.
it's like, okay, that's already like super obvious and almost seems like a SNL skit. But but outside of that, because people are so paranoid about sending their kids to school sick, because if they have anything, they're being sent home and they're asked to get a COVID test. So a lot of parents don't want to go through that trouble. So what they're doing is, if their kids have anything, any symptoms, you're keeping them home. So what happens is that what you're doing is you're masking healthy kids, because they're the ones still showing up to school. You're masking healthy kids to stop the spread of a virus none of them have, that isn't harmful to them. Like, it's just so outrageous. I'm like, even if you believe masks work, I'm like, I've talked to people, like, who disagree with me. I'm like, okay, even if you believe that masks work, the kids wearing them who are in school, the majority of them are healthy. So that means, like, you're stopping the spread of nothing and all the other negative effects of wearing a mask. Because let's be honest, there's no protocol. If my child drops his mask at recess or in the cafeteria, or even worse, in the bathroom, drops his mask and puts it back on his face, there's no protocol to say, like, hey, we got to make sure we replace that mask. We got to make sure kids are not dropping their mask. We have to make sure that kids are washing their hands when they touch the mask. If they sneeze in the mask, we need to replace it. Like, there's no protocol. It's all about complying. So it's like, just show up with something on your face, and if you're complying, you're good. It doesn't.
That's right.
It doesn't matter if it's actually benefiting their health or hurting their health. Like, none of that is important. It's all about just complying, and it's absolutely insane. I mean, most teachers, if you're that afraid of getting the virus, I mean, it's even more ridiculous because in my town where I live, luckily, we're one of the few towns that don't have any mask mandates. So the only people who are masked in my town, and I said this at school committee meetings, I'm like, the only people we're masking in this town are the least at risk people. I'm like, so I can go to the grocery store, the butcher shop, I can go anywhere in town, no mask, and the only people that are required to wear them are the kids. I'm like, it's absolutely insane. And then of course we fought with the school committee, and the dictator Charlie Baker, our great governor here in Massachusetts, he just basically said, hey, I know you guys are all deciding in your own little communities what you want to do, but we're just gonna use our flex our muscles and just enforce mask mandates for the whole state. So like, a lot of people like myself who were going to the school committee meetings and fighting, and we put together a survey, we put together a petition, all this stuff, and then all of a sudden, like, before we could vote, it didn't, none of it mattered. And this commissioner Jeffrey Riley, who's a piece of crap, sorry, this works me up, and he's a piece of crap. He's the one who pushed for this mask mandate with Charlie Baker, and he got I saw an article just a couple weeks ago saying that he's getting like 3 pay increases,
kickbacks, right? So that's what I was going to say that you need to look for. So several states have found that the school boards that are enforcing these mandates have in fact taken money for different the CARES Act or whatever have you, or are getting financial incentives to keep the kids masked and also to vaccinate the kids. They are getting financial incentives. So what you need to do is you need to hire a lawyer. The group of you, between all the parents, an attorney will be very cheap, but you must do this. You need to find an attorney and you need to sue them. You also need to request all of their financial agreements between them, the CDC, the government, as far as what kickbacks they're receiving to mask and vaccinate your children. And not only vaccinate them for COVID, but vaccinate them for the flu, because the next step in what they're starting to do is put these vaccination centers inside of our school system so that they can make sure that your kids are up to date on their vaccines and they can get them right there at the school. It's ridiculous. We have to push back. If we've gotten to a point where we are allowing our healthy children to be masked when they don't need to be masked, And the science says they don't need to be masked. If we are injecting our healthy children with something that they don't need, do you see how far we've gotten? Parents don't understand how far we've gotten. If you are letting them harm your child, be in a state of hypercapnia, which is what happens when they have too much CO2. It's not just about too little oxygen. It's about too much CO2. It causes brain damage, period. It is very dangerous. And parents are just, oh, they said it's fine. They said it's fine. It is not fine. Get your kids out of the damn masks. Stand up, be a parent, quit being a sheep, and get your rights back. Get attorneys. Stop letting these people roll over you that have no care for you, that think that you are cattle. Quit acting like cattle. I'm so sick of people acting like cattle. Going to the airport. I'm the only one who's unmasked in the airport. Everybody else is masked, except for the people sitting and eating a foot away from the people that feel like they have to wear masks. It makes me crazy. Why are people complying? How can you not get a virus when you're sitting, eating and drinking, perhaps coughing because you ingested water the wrong way or food the wrong way? And now you're not going to get a virus, but as soon as you stand up, you have to stick on this face diaper? I see infants 6 years old, their parents forcing masks over their face. It's disgusting. Stand up for your rights. If enough people don't wear masks, guess what? It'll be fine. What, are they going to arrest everybody? Stop complying. That's the key. We have to convince people.
And most police officers are not gonna, I mean, it's not even in their scope of work to enforce these things. There's a great, I'm gonna have, are you familiar with Brian Festa from CT Freedom Alliance and We the Patriots USA? He's a attorney who's always on top of this. I'm gonna have him back on with a local attorney, Justin McCarthy, who I've got to meet or gotten to know in the last couple months since this mask mandate thing. And he's one of those attorneys that are outspoken and he's fighting back. And he made a really valid point about the mask mandates, that the commission that decided to mask the children, once we're out of a state of emergency per se, they have no authority to even make that mandate. Like their scope.
They never did have any authority to make that mandate.
But no. Yeah, the state of emergency nonsense is it's literally it's like we're just assuming that under that the extra power they have because we're in a state of emergency, that they basically can just do everything and anything and nobody can ask questions.
That's right. And I'm glad you noticed that, because there is a limit to their ability to do things. And if people push back really, if you have to think, if they are forcing a mandate for something which has been scientifically proven over and over and over again not to work, then there is no limit to what they could ask you to do towards what they say is a public health help. You have to understand this. If they're allowed to do it for something that is not even scientifically reliable, what else will they mandate in your best interest? And if you don't fight it now, there won't be a precedent upon which you can save yourself from going to a quarantine camp, from not being able to go to the grocery store, from not receiving medical care, from not getting life insurance, from not being able to use public transportation. We have to stop it now, and people have to get off their gosh darn butts and do something, and not think that everybody else is going to do it for them. Everybody has to be involved. Everybody.
Well, think about, I almost feel like we're winning though a little bit, because how many, if we're having this conversation 18 months ago, whenever ago, sometime in 2020, all these conversations would be so taboo. I mean, I remember the outrage if I even compared the coronavirus to a flu. Like, people would just lose their mind. They're like, this is not a flu, hospitals are being filled and blah blah blah, even though nurses are doing TikTok videos and all the mobile hospitals were never used and all this other stuff. Like, and then all the Instagram pages of people walking into their hospitals just filming it and recording it, and people are like, oh, they're fake, that's fake. It's like, No, I don't think they're all fake, and I know plenty of people in local hospitals that they were kind of saying the same thing. They were waiting and waiting for the uproar of patients that never came, and they started getting skeptical of this whole thing. And why I say we're winning is because I feel like these discussions now can publicly be discussed. They're not considered conspiracy theories. They're not, the lab leak theory is not a conspiracy theory. The fact that there's actual treatments that work that were being suppressed isn't a conspiracy theory. Like, there's so many different things that were conspiracy theory a year ago or a year and a half ago that now are publicly being discussed and really publicly being entertained by people who were so anti-Trump. And I'm a political atheist. I could care less about
I've
what.
voted both sides as well over the years. So
Yeah. So,
it's not political, and I hate it when people say that it's political. It's nothing to do with politics when the science is crappy, and it's to support.
Politics is what blinded people to see what was really going on, because so many people took their side on this issue based on their political party side. So it's like, if my political party is saying this, then that's the side I defend. Like, if I'm on the left, then all mandates are for the greater good, and all masks are for the greater good, and the vaccines for the greater good. And if I'm on, and anybody who says otherwise, it's because they're MAGA hat wearing, Trump.
That's funny, because Trump said the same thing, right? That he got a warp speed vaccine out. It's so good for you. It's great for you. So how is that opposing the dialogue? It's not. Trump has never said that these are dangerous. He's never said this is not the thing to do. In fact, that is why I will never vote for the man for anything again, because he has enough advisors around him to know that that's not the truth.
The only thing I give him credit for is that during the initial, when he was running for president, when it was Dr. Carson, right? He actually brought up the vaccine topic, and it was the only time that any elected president ever publicly, at least publicly, has questioned vaccines. And he actually questioned it. It's actually kind of like one of those clips that people kind of forgot about, because they were bringing up the vaccine topic to kind of make Trump look bad. And he basically just said, he's like, I just think that we're giving too many vaccines to too young of kids. And Dr. Carson's like, yeah, I kind of, I can kind of see that, and it was like.
And then Pfizer gave him $1 million to his campaign, and he didn't talk about it again.
Well, that's exactly why people are so torn on Trump, because a lot of people who are on our side of the debate, they're convinced that Trump's also on our side. And I'm just like, well, there's little hints and things that you could cherry pick to say that he is. Like, he did bring up a hydroxychloroquine, which I'm sure the vaccine companies did not like, and so, yeah, but and then gave the vaccine companies tons of money to produce a vaccine. So I'm like,
that's right.
I'm like, so you can't, cherry pick the things you like and disregard the evidence that he's actually helping fast track this. So it's I can see that. But what I mean by the fact that it's not political, it's like when you see guys like Kyrie Irving and Orlando Magic player, Isaac Johnson, and you start seeing like, black athletes who hated Trump now being outspoken about the vaccines, and you're starting to see unions that are traditionally very left-leaning and pro-Democratic Party, they're pushing back against the mandates. Like, we're finally, I almost feel like we're finally detached and far enough from the election that people can start looking at this issue not political and just say, okay, this doesn't make a lot of sense and that doesn't make a lot of sense. Yeah. And even though people who like Trump have similar point of views on this topic, I'm not gonna, we're detached enough, and because I think election year, they do a great job of divide and conquer, right? They get us all to fight among ourselves. And I was like you, I was so frustrated because I kept telling people, I'm like, this isn't a political thing. It's a big pharma thing. It's a control.
That's right.
I'm like, and people like yourself and I who've been following, big pharma forever. And I mean, I've done shows years ago with Dr. Gregory A. Smith, who did the American Addict documentary, Dr. Brzezinski and his whole fight with the FDA and his cancer treatment. I mean, I'm like, big pharmas are pieces of crap. And like most people on the left would agree with you until 2020, and all of a sudden we think they're the good guys. Like we think like they're out to help us and support us. Like I thought the left was supposed to be all anti-corporations, and all of a sudden you think like a for-profit corporation now has morals, and even though they've taken, fines.
They have zero liability. Yeah, come on.
Well, that's the other thing, right? Like as long as they're but how different is it than like typical, because with the vaccine courts, they typically, don't have any liability anyway. So this vaccine's not any different than past vaccines, correct? Or
no, so they do have some liability if they knew that it would cause harm. They do have liability. So they can be sued. Moreover, all of the people that are going along with this can also be sued that don't have that protection. So, in terms of holding people accountable, if your employer makes you get this shot, if your state governor makes you get this shot, any of those people, if you're denied medical care, if you don't have this shot and you suffer harm, all of those people, even though there's some ephemeral protection, supposedly under these mandates, which are not law, that Biden has issued, there really isn't protection when it comes down to it. Because people do not have informed consent, and you're forcing them to take a medicine for which they do not have proper informed consent. Even if you just take the most basic things, such as Pfizer's mystery ingredient that makes up purportedly 20% of the shot, but they're not going to tell you what it is. So they're not going to tell a scientist what it is. So how are we supposed to have any informed consent if we don't know 20% of a portion of the Pfizer vaccine? It's just ridiculous. And it goes on because of the global labs that have found all of the contaminants, the cadmium, the chromium, the steel, the aluminum that are in these shots. Frankly, much worse than that with some of the stuff that's coming out from Dr. Young's lab and the Scientist Club, trypanosomes. Some other polypodia parasites that have been purportedly identified. Again, we need an independent analysis, but what is missing from all of this is that we do not have an independent analysis of these batches of these shots as they're going out. So here we have these global labs that say they're finding all of these contaminants, they're finding graphene oxide, all of this stuff. And we have no independent laboratories overseeing at the FDA or the CDC the batch formulations that are going into people, that are going into kids, really? Who are we to turn to? Now we have to get an attorney to force the FDA to do an independent analysis on their own because of what's being found globally, and yet you're still trying to stick this in arms? It's appalling. And yet we're still having, 90% of this discussion will be about the vaccines when we have safe and effective therapeutics that can eradicate this tomorrow. I mean, a month and a half. If we did what some other countries have been doing with ivermectin, we could get rid of this. We wouldn't have COVID. It wouldn't be a question of needing to formulate something new, that, the new Delta variant vaccine for the next thing, which will just push the Lambda to be the predominant variant here. I guarantee it. Just watch. None of these will ever work. They're leaky. They're crappy vaccines. They will never work. We have to stop transmission. The only way to stop transmission is with hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin and other things that stop viral replication and transmission. That's it. I don't know why it's so hard for people to wrap their head around the fact that if you know that you can get the virus and you can transmit the virus with a vaccine, how in the heck is that supposed to stop the pandemic? It won't. So why are we even talking about vaccines? Why are we developing more vaccines? We have ivermectin. It's been shown to work in other countries. Look what happened in India. In the countries that use it and haven't been corrupted, it works great. While we know that the countries that are the most vaccinated, it doesn't work. So how do we force that these out of patent, they should be cheap. Now their prices skyrocketed because of demand. How do we force that these out of patent drugs actually be used? That's a great question. We're trying to figure that out. How do we force our government to allow our doctors to do their job and to quit being in the pocket of the pharmacy companies? What do you do when those regulatory agencies are no longer doing their job? We've got to ask a question at some point. You know that the People's Bill, have you covered that? I haven't seen all your shows late. Have you covered the People's Bill?
I have not. So would you like to tell people what it's about?
Sure. So the People's Bill is being pushed through right now while everybody's worrying about mandates. The People's Bill has been brought up by the new czar of banking. She happens to be a communist by all, intents and purposes. Her thesis was on Marx. She studied under a Lenin scholarship in Russia, Samara. And she is pushing through digital banking while everybody's paying attention to the mandates. So look up the People's Bill, because it's already been introduced as a bill, and it will essentially use the health crisis to push through digital banking and a social credit system just like China has. And you haven't heard anything about it, have you?
No, I actually haven't, I don't think. And I'm try to stay pretty much in the loop in regards to, researching and then listening to other researchers. So, but that's basically a part of the plan. I mean, the World Economic Forum, I mean, obviously the Great Reset, the new normal. I mean, these are all concepts that they're trying to push. Now, I mean, obviously a lot of people in the alternative media community can debate if it was on purpose or if this was the plan in the first place all along. But one thing we know for sure is that either, this was the whole plan of like causing this chaos to utilize the chaos to push these other agendas, or they're just taking advantage of the chaos to push these agendas. But either way, these agendas are being pushed. And you could see what's going on. It's about control. It's about tracking us. It's about, possibly even pushing these ideas for smart cities where they have cameras and sensors everywhere. That's where we're heading. And the thing is, it's like there's such baby steps where it's 2 years ago when this was first happening. I mean, just conversations about a mandate, vaccine mandate, was something that people are like, oh, that would never happen. And now it's like, you just take little baby steps. You accept a little bit less freedom. You accept a little bit more tyranny. And little by little, next thing you know, it's like that boiling frog thing. You throw a frog in boiling water, it jumps out. But if you slowly start boiling the water, next thing you know, it's in boiling water and had no idea that you did it. So that's kind of what's going on now, where it's like they don't implement these things quickly. It's like slowly. So it's like, it's just a mask. It's just, a vaccine. Mm-hmm. It's just this, it's just that. And then next thing you know, we're all being controlled and watched, and privacy. I mean, privacy is already almost a thing of the past, but it'll be even less privacy, even less freedoms. And it's important to have these discussions, because this big is what people miss. People like they debate the little details about what's going on right now, and they don't connect all the dots to see the big picture. And I think many of us that have been in this community for a long time, I mean, this was kind of what they wanted all along. I mean, they started with the children. Now it's like they went to the adults, and now they're backtracking and they're trying to vaccinate children. But I'm like, a lot of us got in this movement because we're trying to prevent the children from getting vaccinated in the first place. I mean, years ago, I mean, we were talking about how many states were pushing to get rid of religious exemptions and all these other things. I mean, my kids have never been vaccinated ever with no vaccines, and we've used religious exemptions. And my son at 6 years old is a star soccer player. Both my kids are of course they're my kids. I'm going to brag a little bit. They're very intelligent, and the teachers love them, And, I remember my wife being like, are the teachers all going to talk about like, hey, we're the weird anti-vaccine family? I'm like, they're going to fall in love with the kids, and the kids are going to do great. And then everybody's going to, forget about the fact that they're not vaccinated. And then they're going to be cognitively more aware. They're going to be less sick than all the other kids. And maybe some of the people who know the teachers who know they haven't been vaccinated will, have a little bit of doubt about how necessary those vaccines are when they see examples. And that's really important. For a long time, people in our community were afraid because of how emotional these topics were, where people didn't people didn't want to talk about like the vaccine topic. People didn't want to share that maybe their kids weren't vaccinated because they were worried about how they were going to get looked at, or maybe sparking a heated argument. One thing that was always really startling to me was how many people would get very passionate about vaccines and how important they are, and then 2 seconds into the conversation, I'm like, wow, you've done no research on this. I'm like, you literally like they have no idea what you're talking about. They don't know the basic things, like they don't know what the VAR system is. They don't know there's a vaccine court, like basic things. I'm like, that's kind of like like white belt stuff. You should kind of know those basic things if you're going to be arguing for this product to be injected in our children. So it's we've been talking.
The propaganda has been very effective.
Yeah.
I'll admit I was not even aware of this stuff. I mean, I helped, in the creation of a vaccine in the 90s, and I really didn't look at the issue. We had problems with our vaccine. It caused autoimmune ovarian destruction. I was on a team of other researchers, and then I kind of got out of the vaccine business for a while and was working on other stuff. And I hadn't looked into any of that and really trusted, like everybody else did, that vaccines are safe, that the appropriate studies have been done. When I got involved in this fight, knowing that this was all orchestrated, that the gain of function research had gone on, I was trying to tell colleagues this back when it first came out. Like, what do you mean this came from pangolins or a bat? There's a trail a mile long of papers and gain of function research and grants. And I put that all out on Facebook. I'd argue with my colleagues, and they said I didn't know what I was talking about. And that's crazy. No one would do that on purpose. At some point, you have to realize that propaganda is so strong. And even for me, I didn't look into the vaccine issue until lately. And when I did look into it, I was horrified at what I had blithely looked over and allowed to be injected in my kids without the proper studies. Del Bigtree just did a great expose on that, and several other people have from the World Vaccine Safety Summit. Basically having all of them say that none of the experiments had been done on multiple adjuvants used together, that no experiments have been done on the safety of using multiple different vaccines together. Adjuvants that had never been used, were the safety studies for them were being substituted for safety studies of adjuvants that had been used that weren't even in the formulation. Just, crazy stuff. And they're admitting that they've never done it. And no, now would be a great time to do it, since we're going to be able to track people better in the future, they say, which comes back to this bill that's being pushed through. Apparently they want all the private bank accounts to be taken, and all of them will go under control of the IRS. You'll be digitally tracked through the IRS, and they're trying to figure out how much money to give people each, what their base allotment will be in their account, which means that they're taking everything that you have ever saved, and they will take it from you. And then they will track you in the beginning through that account, but at the same time, they want to track you digitally through these vaccines. So it's coming if we don't stop. If we don't stop this, it's coming. It's in the works already.
Well, now's a good time. I should have probably asked you this in the beginning of the show, but a little bit of your origin story. Like, what did lead you? Obviously, like you said, you had some type of shift in your thinking, and obviously, if we are just discussing what's current events right now, I would assume that you always thought like this, but apparently that wasn't always the case. And what was it? Let us know a little bit about your origin story, and then let us know what got you down that rabbit hole to kind of start questioning some of the things that you're kind of just accepting.
Okay, so I have a PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology from the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center. I worked as a scientist for a long time after college. And instead of going into a PhD or master's program right away, I worked what we call at the bench on various projects before I ended up going back late in career to get my PhD. So I worked on the first job that I had at Baylor College of Medicine was working in a reproductive biology lab with Dr. Bonnie Dunbar and her team on the creation of a temporary contraceptive vaccine. And it really would have been great because the design of the vaccine was to prevent fertilization. So most of our immunocontraceptions actually allow for fertilization, but prevent implantation. So if you can prevent fertilization, then the argument over there being a fertilized egg and embryo and that not, being allowed to implant is very attractive for a lot of groups. So we were developing this vaccine, and when we did all the what we call the blasting to see that it wouldn't cross-react with ovarian proteins or other proteins in the body. But unfortunately, when we got to the development phase in some of the animal studies, it did cause ovarian destruction. So this highlights why it's important to do the proper animal studies. I can tell you that for these vaccines, the animal model that they used was wrong. They used rats, they used rodents. Rodents do not have the same syncytin proteins, which are the proteins that are very similar to the spike protein. And they are also essential for maintenance of pregnancy. Rodents don't have an ACE2 receptor that's like the human ACE2 receptor, which is why they did a lot of the experiments in ACE2 competent mice, transgenic mice that were transfected with the ACE2 receptor, or else they did experiments where the murine platelets were transfected with the ACE2 receptor or what have you in order to make it more similar to humans. So for all of these vaccines, basically we have the only studies that were done for the most part were done inappropriately in the wrong species to assess the endpoints that we're looking at. Unbelievably, they're telling us that for 5 to 11-year-olds, they can guarantee that they are not going to have any puberty problems or fertility problems. I ask you, where might they find that data on 5 to 11-year-olds? Because I don't see them getting pregnant that often. And I don't know that we have any fertility studies on 5 to 11-year-olds. And did they really check how many of these kids were ending up with menstrual irregularities? Because the last time I checked, the numbers on menstrual irregularities reported into VAERS is 14,028 menstrual irregularities from these shots. There were 5,034 reports of vaginal and uterine hemorrhage, all ages. 2,508 miscarriages, 1,000 cases of testicular pain and swelling. But they're going to guarantee us that none of those is going to happen to your child if they vaccinate with this. They don't have the data to show that. What we do have is the data to show the opposite, that kids are having problems. There's a tragic story of a 6-year-old starting her menses after being in contact with a physical therapist on a daily basis for about a week following the physical therapist's shot. She's 6-year-old started her menses. She's in one of the groups that I'm involved in. The parents can't reverse it. That's not normal. That's just from shedding. That wasn't even from getting the vaccine. We've got hundreds of thousands at this point of reports of women reporting menstrual irregularities. It's not a fluke. Something's going on, and it's being discounted. But they still say, "Oh, give this to pregnant women. It's completely safe. Give this to your children." And I won't back off of what I originally told the CDC, which is you will sterilize an entire generation if you go forward with this campaign. At this point, if we go any lower in age, it's going to be several generations.
Well, that could be the purpose. I mean, if anybody knows the history of eugenics, there's a lot of reasons to believe that that could be one of the goals. And not just that, killing the older population is beneficial to the elite in the government, because they really are contributing very little financially, right? And they're using Medicare and all these other government departments to stay alive and for their necessities, and they're getting retirement and all this stuff. So it's speculation, but it would kind of make financial sense. Like, wow, if all these people pass away, how much more money we'll be saving from all the help they get from the government. And but who knows? Because we recklessly throw money around. I just found this out. I was born in Portugal, and I have relatives in Portugal that at some point lived in America, and but they were getting stimulus checks. I have relatives in France, relatives in Portugal that have not been in the country for 15, 20 years. And they all got, because my parents didn't get their stimulus check for a while. And my mother was complaining about it. She's like, how the hell are my siblings in Portugal who haven't been in the country for 20 years getting their, and I'm like, wait, what, Mom? I'm like, wait, you're telling me that I have uncles and aunts who haven't been in the country in forever were receiving stimulus checks? She's like, yeah. And I'm like, what I'm like, what? How can you even stimulate the economy if you're not even in the country? I'm like, that's how reckless they are with our money. I mean, they just don't care, and it's just like, it boggles my mind. And so it's just, but I guess people would use that as the argument of like, well, that's how this can't be a well-designed plan, because they're idiots and they do stupid things like that. But
the goal is to collapse the economy of the United States so that it is no longer the major superpower. I mean, that's what I believe, is to allow for the one world government to come in, and that is under communism. That's been the plan of the elite in the World Economic Forum for a while, to have China lead the one world government under a communistic regime. And they're not hiding that. It's not like this is some conspiracy theory that I'm pulling out of thin air. This is something that they have advocated for years. It's public knowledge. You can go on the internet, you can look it up, you can look up the World Economic Forum, you can look up their plan. It's not a secret. So we really need to be discussing this in real terms. And you need to ask important questions like, why is China allowed to own several of our ports? Why does China have 20,000 acres next to one of our largest military bases? Why does China own a lot of our power grid? Why are they allowed to? I was talking with a colleague lately, and I said, I wonder if we're more like Hong Kong than we are the US. How in the world could we maintain our own national security, yet allow for that to happen? Do you think China's going to let the US buy their ports? Are they going to let 80% of the graduate students in all of their universities, be represented by the Americans? Do you think that's in their strategic national interest? Because it's what we've done over here. And it's extremely disconcerting. I have nothing against the Chinese people as a people, but I also expect our government to protect our national security and our resources and our scientific endeavors by not allowing these things.
Well, in sports, there's just, I tell people this all the time because I have friends that are not into this stuff, much at all, but they're big sports fans. And I try to tell them, like, look how much China has influence just on American sports. Mm-hmm. Cantor, who's a center for the Celtics, I live in Massachusetts, so I've heard of this story, and it was, it wasn't surprising to me, but I had friends who were like, did you hear, how can they do that? So Cantor spoke out against the Chinese government. I don't know exactly what he said, but I believe he's from Turkey, and he's been pretty politically outspoken throughout his whole career, but he just put out a statement or something like that was anti the Chinese government, and China stopped televising Celtics games for a guy who basically gets no playing time, is on the bench. But that's how much pull they have. And if people think that's not a big deal, I'll give you another statistic. There's more NBA fans in China than there are people in the US. So if you don't televise a game, it's a huge part of the market. It's tons of money, TV time and marketing time. Like, it's a huge hit in their pocket. I mean, John Cena, who's I'm sure you know who he is. He's like the celebrity slash wrestler slash movie star. He was in the WWE, and he said something that like offended the Chinese government, and he learned their native tongue just to apologize in their native tongue in a video. Like, that's insane. But that's how much pull do they have, that Vince McMahon's like, no, we need to correct this. And that's how, so it's like they already have huge influence in our companies, our markets, all this, you know, and this is just stuff that we can see and stuff that's just obvious. I mean, there's so, like you said, there's so much going on behind the scenes, and then, you know, front companies and all this other stuff. I mean, we are turning into communist China, and with unknowingly, and it's again, it's nothing against it's nothing against the Chinese people. I mean, a good friend of mine is married to a Chinese girl, and she's
of course it's not. Yeah, it's not an ethnic
but
statement. It's a political.
Yes.
We don't want communism in this country. At least I would think most people don't, and not that brand of communism.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's like, it's not even like we're discussing communism as a idea, or socialism or Marxism as an idea, and be like, okay, here's a philosophy. Let's dissect it. Let's talk about the pros and cons of it. Let's see. I think it's not really about the ism as much as it's just a label that we're putting on a government that controls their people. I mean, it's just, you know, people I think can get so caught up with the isms. I mean, I've had Professor Richard Wolff on, who's one of the, you know, leading outspoken Marx historian. I don't know what his label is. He's a professor, but he's also kind of a socialist historian. And I like exploring those ideas. But they, like everything, they can, you know, you put a idea in the hands of people who are corrupt, who really don't care about that, the origin of that idea or the purpose of that idea. They care about, how can I use this idea or this ism to control people and manipulate people. And that's what ends up happening. It's like socialism or even capitalism, like any of the isms as a theory, like you can say like, oh, okay, in theory, this works this way and it could work out well. But there's one thing we know for sure: where there's people, there's going to be corruption, and it's just a matter of time before somebody takes advantage of this, or they manipulate the rules, or they whatever to benefit themselves. So it's not really a war, like you said. It's not really about the Chinese people. It's not about communism per se. It's about people who want to control other people. And throughout history, that's always been the case. I mean, and you read history, one thing that's always consistent is that there are people, and then there's people who want to control those people. I mean, that's always happened. Why do we think
democracy is just a blip on the radar, really? I mean, how long has this concept of letting such a large number of people have access to the wealth that typically only the elite or the upper levels had? It hasn't been around for very long. And, you know, apparently those at the top have decided that it doesn't really suit them anymore. So,
but do you think that's why America is such a threat to the rest of the world? Because one thing that's unique about this country, and it's funny because I always, like, when I first was like politically aware of what's going on in the world, one thing that was very motivating to me was being anti-war. You know, like I could see the propaganda used for to get us into unjust wars, and then after they were all said and done, there was people who have PTSD, people who lost loved ones, tons of taxpayers' money were given to corporations, and the politicians just go, "Oops, yeah, I guess we messed up on that one. Maybe we shouldn't have went to, you know, Syria or Afghanistan or wherever, or Iraq or Vietnam, or just go down the list of countries we've got involved in that. We just say, yeah, maybe that was a bad idea." And so I always felt like being patriotic was a great tool to convince people to go to war. It's like, oh yeah, it's about, you're defending America, you're defending, you know. And I'm like, have you read
about the money?
Yeah. And I'm like, you know, have you read War is a Racket? Do you know who Smedley Butler is? I mean, like, no, I'm like, they're convincing you that you're defending freedoms. What you're really defending is KBR and Halliburton and all these corporations that are benefiting from this. And you're helping them get the natural resources. But so I always had this weird feeling towards being patriotic and nationalism. I'm like, oh, it's a tool used to control people, and maybe and now, like, my views have kind of slightly changed, because now I look at it and I'm like, people who are patriotic and nationalistic, like if they defend a true origin of this country, which, like, I mean, we were founded by people who hated monarchies and revolted against them and try to create a country that was experimental and different from all other countries, that basically could prevent that type of corruption that we saw in other countries happening here. And a lot of the people who really believe in those, or who are patriotic and believe in that story of America and believe it's important and pure and it's unique, those are the people fighting back. So I'm almost like, what, maybe we really are unique. Maybe this experiment really is important, what they were trying to accomplish, because this is exactly what they were trying to prevent, was this.
And people look to us from all over the world, Ricky, all over the world. I get messages, as I know you do too. They are looking to America to save them from the oncoming atrocities or what's already going on. Australia, I had people begging me from Australia, can't you do something? Can't you and the other people that you're involved with do something? They are looking to America to fix this. And I hope to God we can. I pray about it all the time. So do many others that I'm working with, because I really do feel as well that this is as much a spiritual war as it is a war for our rights, for our God-given rights, and that we have to oppose tyranny. Medical tyranny is the most evil form of tyranny, because it's basically letting someone else have dominion over your body, and it won't stop with a shot that you don't need to make you sick or to shorten your lifespan. If they decide that you are a nice match, and you have good kidneys or you have a great heart or something else, and it's for the greater good, then what will stop them from just using you as an organ harvester, which is basically what they're already doing openly in China. China was banned from many of the transplant societies because people finally figured out that how is it possible that they had so many hearts and so many lungs in such a short period of time? They always had access to them. And it's because they had DNA typed their entire population. And they were also using a subset of their political prisoners and religious prisoners as basically organ banks, live organ banks, to access donor organs for their transplants. And it's just sickening. And now, of course, all in the news is that our DNA is being sold to China. Well, come on, that was known. It was known a long time ago. All these genetic family tree programs, 23andMe, all that data goes to China. And if you don't think that they will use it, if they ever are in a position over the United States, you're just crazy and you're not naive.
Yep.
This is what we have to fight. And we've got to stand up. And for a lot of people that were not nationalists, who thought that America perhaps had done some unscrupulous things in other countries, at this point, this is about survival. I really feel that people need to wake up and understand what's going on, that if we see all this casualty from something that's being forced upon you, that there won't be any safe place if we don't stop this now.
Yeah, one thing you hit on that's really important, people don't know, 23andMe, all these type of companies, all their stuff gets sent to a Chinese lab. So yep. They have records of all that stuff. So without a doubt. And you're right. I mean, we have done some messed up things, but I like to separate the people and the government. And I think that the government for a long time don't represent the people. And I think when you look at like the wars that we've been involved in and all the horrors, the horrible things we've done throughout history, a lot of it, was not with the benefit of, or was not backed by the people. And anytime it was backed by the people based on false information and propaganda. So you were tricked into believing that this is for these reasons and this is what's best for us and all that stuff. So, I think sometimes we look at, I think for a long time, like you said, like the government, their actions, kind of people assumed it reflected the people who lived in the country, but it didn't. And a lot of us were anti these wars. There were did not want to get involved. The same thing with Australia, like you said, like what the government's doing, that's not what the people want. I mean, people are revolting, and they're not televising it because they don't want
Right.
you to protest. They don't want you to think that there's plenty of people out there who are upset. Even the unions, like the in Massachusetts, a state cop got the vaccine and passed away, and now it kind of sparked interest in the union to really push back against the vaccine mandates. And so we're starting to see a trend where people seem to be waking up, and people are starting to ask questions. So I think there's more of us out there than we think. Many of us feel like we live in a bubble where we're surrounded by crazy people, and this bubble is keeping all the crazy people out. But the truth is, there are many of us, and we, like you said, we all get contacted by a lot of people out there who feel the same way and are thinking the same thing. And there are people out there protesting and being outspoken. But just because you don't see them, it doesn't mean they don't exist. But we're not alone, and as long as we keep being outspoken and verbal, then hopefully we can push, stop this, pump the brakes, and stop this trend into a dangerous place.
Yeah, there's a lot of us scientists that are really trying to also get the correct science out there. And so I'll just give you a few teasers on that and dispel a few myths. One of them is that pregnant women are at great risk of dying from COVID disease, and their babies are at great risk. I want to let the audience know that pregnant women are actually amongst the group that is the most safe group with respect to COVID. And I know you haven't heard that, but there are actually 4 studies which support this. And they're large studies, and they're good studies. We've got one out of Oxford. We've got one in the Annals of Medicine. And we've got 2 CDC studies, and they all show definitively that mortality and hospitalization is much greater in men and in non-pregnant women than it is in pregnant women. So the mortality risk for pregnant women is much lower than it is for non-pregnant women, age-adjusted mortality included. So that whole myth that you are going to be at this great risk of dying of COVID if you were pregnant and your baby was at great risk is really a myth. It's not based in data at all. So I wanted to let people know that. 2, the whole fertility, say we've done the reproductive studies. We know we kind of covered that earlier. I wanted to touch on a study that was done in Singapore that many of your listeners may have heard about already, the Singapore Sin study, where it showed that all of the women that were vaccinated with the Pfizer vaccine developed autoantibodies to Syncytin-1, their own placental protein. They did not follow up on that study. They did not assess fertility following the development of those autoantibodies, which would be the next logical step. It was completely buried in the paper. In fact, the abstract of the paper and in the introduction, they said that none of the women developed antibodies. And then at the very end of the discussion of the paper, they said, well, all of the women developed antibodies, but we just didn't think the levels were high enough to mean anything. So this is how crooked these authors are getting about things. And in the end, they say, well, don't take any of our studies as any assurance that this won't cause a problem, because we really don't know what it means and we need more follow-up studies. But the fact that if you just took the abstract and the introduction from this study and you took the author's words, they said none of the women developed antibodies, when in fact, all of the women developed antibodies. That's how bad science has gotten. So a group of scientists have gotten together. There's several groups that have done this all over the world. We're trying to restore ethics to science. We're trying to get the real data out there. And you should know that we'll soon be coming out with the manipulation of the CDC childhood hospitalization and death rates. So the CDC looks to be actively manipulating the death counts in children and hospitalization rates in children to particular states, among them Florida and Texas. That's a surprise, isn't it? Yeah, so we've got someone who's an expert data analyst who's downloaded all the data from the CDC. And so we'll be coming out with that shortly. And because this push to get shots in the arms of kids is based on this false and manipulated data, it definitely matters that the data is false and manipulated. People need to know that, to not trust the data that's coming out of the CDC. They have an agenda, just like their vaccination status, which only doesn't exist after your first shot, but only exists after your second shot and 14 days after that, even though we know from the VAERS data and going into the VAERS reports that the majority of the deaths happen within the first 48 hours of either shot. Yet they're not vaccinated according to the CDC. That is how corrupt they have gotten to try to hide this data and obfuscate from the people. We also know the transmission myth, okay? The transmission myth that people that are vaccinated are transmitting the virus less or cannot transmit the virus. That is absolutely false. In fact, the latest research show that the vaccinated are transmitting the virus more than the unvaccinated are, and not just the unvaccinated that didn't or that already had COVID, the unvaccinated period. The new UK data shows absolutely that that's what's going on, that the vaccinated are driving the pandemic, as I warned a few months ago, and others warned that these vaccines being leaky would drive the pandemic. That's in fact what's happening. And now we're seeing antibody-dependent enhancement, and we're seeing the vaccinated at a really high risk for mortality and morbidity right now. So we have to get medication to everybody. We have places where you can still get medication, where you can still get ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. I encourage people to do that for all, especially for their vaccinated family members and themselves if they've been vaccinated. We can treat effectively early on with ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, budesonide, some other medicines. If we get to it early, won't have to go to the hospital, won't end up there, but we have to get to it early, and then it can be extremely effective.
Yeah, when I had Dr. Peter McCullough on, he told me something that I didn't hear about until he mentioned it, that in India, I think it was India, where they had like one of the biggest ivermectin labs was burned down coincidentally. And
just like hydroxychloroquine explosions, right? Do you remember those? In 220, three of the biggest plants for hydroxychloroquine were blown up. You didn't remember that? Just look it up.
But it's all coincidence. It's coincidental. It boggles my mind. I mean, when Cuomo tells you that, tells a doctor that they can't prescribe a drug for political reasons, I mean, could it be any more obvious that it's not about medicine? I mean, politicians should never be making those decisions. And it's mind-boggling. It's still, I think people like us are, sometimes it's really hard to not get a little upset with people. Like, how do you still not see it when there's so much evidence showing you that you've been lied to, and there's very little evidence showing that they were telling you the truth at all? And but like just recently, a couple of days ago, I was at the gym, and a guy, he's a retired a mailman, and always friendly guy, but he's like super left leaning. And we got into talking about some current events and the COVID thing, and he's just like, he was getting you could tell he was getting emotional. He was getting worked up. I'm like, he got the vaccine. I'm like, it doesn't stop you from spreading it. You know that, right? Like, this whole idea that you don't have to wear a mask if you get the vaccine makes zero logical sense, because we know it doesn't stop you from spreading. He's like, no, I don't believe that one bit. And he got, and then I ran into him today at the gym this morning, and he's like, hey, Rick, some of the things you were saying, he's like, it got me thinking, like, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And this, no. So, and it's funny because it was two complete extreme feelings. The first conversation with them, I went away thinking to myself, like, yep, they're just some people you're just never going to get through to. They're looking at this as a political issue, and you're just never going to get through to them, because they're always going to relate for some reason, even though we stated that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But a lot of people relate being anti-COVID vaccine or being anti-lockdown or masks as a Trump thing. And then after today, I talked to him, and I'm like, you know what? maybe those conversations are worth having, because even though at the moment you don't feel like you're getting through to them, you're planting the seed. And when they emotionally calm down and they start reanalyzing the conversation, maybe you were planting the seed. Maybe I don't get through to him directly or just on my own, but then he runs into somebody else who has similar thoughts, who has knows how to stay calm and have a casual conversation, and then somebody else, and everybody just keeps planting these seeds until eventually he wakes up to like, holy crap, like I've been lied to. And it, like one of my favorite Mark Twain quote, it's easier to trick somebody than convince them they've been tricked. And that's exactly what's going on. It's impossible to get people to kind of realize they've been tricked. And so yeah,
well, in the Nazi general admission that they asked him, how did you get away with what you got away with? And he said the key was to make it so egregious that no one could conceive that another human could do that to another human, essentially. So the more evil the plan, the less likely it was to be believed. And the people that tried to expose it were just thought to be conspiracists. It's exactly the same. That's why we have so many Holocaust survivors speaking out now and saying, open your eyes. This is exactly what happened to us. They've even penned a letter to the United States and Europe and saying, this is what happened during the Holocaust. We see it. Please stop this. But of course, the governments are already corrupted. So I'm very serious when I tell people that it is up to them to take their country back. Your government's not going to do it for you. So unless you get the people out of office that are perpetrating this by whatever means you can, then this is going to continue.
Well, something, and that example, that Nazi Germany example, is very important, because I think that is one of the issues we're having with people being able to accept what's going on, is that it seems so crazy that they just have a hard time accepting that people that evil exist. But like we stated before, like they've always existed. Many of the people who are waking up, like I live in a population, or a town where the population is mostly Polish and Portuguese immigrants, and you talk to Polish people who came from communism, or you talk to older Portuguese people who remember growing up during we had a dictator, his name was Salazar, a long time ago, and people who lived through that, like they can kind of see what's going on. And people who've never had to live through that, they don't, they're not seeing it, and they just assume like, oh, people like that don't exist, like there's no such thing as dictators and monarchies anymore. It's like, no, they still exist. We've just been convinced that we live in a democracy, when really we live in a monarchy where it's just a ruling class ruling over others. And they just give us enough freedom to convince us that, like, oh, yeah, you guys can do your own thing, and we're not controlling you, and we have a democracy and all that. So it's it's a illusion, and people live in that illusion. And I think people have, but if you look at wars, that's one thing that I don't understand. Like, if we understand that big pharma historically has always gotten in trouble for putting out drugs, or even chemical companies for putting out things that are harming people, knowingly harming people, like they go to court, they end up releasing papers, are like, oh shit, Teflon's bad for you, and they,
Right.
Like I had the attorney from that movie Dark Waters, who sued DuPont with a group of attorneys who exposed this whole thing. And I mean, Teflon was on every nonstick pan and all this stuff, and they knew it could harm us, and yet could care less. So it's like there's example and example. I mean, look at our wars. I mean, how many people died in Iraq, and how many lives were lost, and how many people are still living with PTSD over a bullshit war. And politicians knew what they were doing, and they were comparing and connecting dots with 9/11 and Iraq to kind of confuse us and think that it had some relation, which it didn't, just to get us there. And like, so we know that they lied. We know that they were okay with people dying, with people losing loved ones. They knew like all the bad things and negative things that could happen with getting involved in Iraq, and yet they didn't care. So it's like, so why is it hard to believe that they would push a vaccine that's harmful on the people? I'm like, it just, to me, it's like, if you see this, you should be able to see that, you know. But
Yeah.
that's why I think a lot of spiritual people and religious people seem to be the ones who are snapping out of it, or seeing it first, because they're like, I believe in evil. I know evil people exist. So I can understand that evil people are pushing this agenda. And I think people who aren't spiritual or religious, and I'm not, I wouldn't say that I'm spiritual or religious, but I can understand it. But I can talk to other people who aren't spiritual and religious, and they seem to struggle. They seem to struggle that evil, to understand that evil actually exists, and there's evil people out there, you know.
I wouldn't say that you're not spiritual, or you're just not, may not be there yet. There are lots of examples of people who were, lots of examples in the Bible. Some of the most evil people in the Bible, right? Didn't didn't start out to be great people and prophets in the end. They were the worst. You know, they were the degenerates. They were the murderers. They were all of this. The atheists. They ended up being the most faithful. So I wouldn't discount your spirituality as something that's a permanent state. I think God is wise, you know.
Well, the nice thing about myself is I don't have any permanent state. I'm constantly
Yeah.
molding my opinions and perspectives, and I'm open to everything. I have a real problem with people who, um, they because, especially atheism, because I was raised a Catholic, and I kind of rebelled against it. And then I'm like, yeah, these atheists are making a whole lot of sense, and they're questioning things. And that's what I like, because the religious people I'm constantly around don't like when you question things. And these atheists do like to question things. And then I realized, like, oh crap, I just left what I thought was like a team, to go to somewhere where that was open-minded. And I'm like, I just joined another team. I'm like, these guys are just as, they're calling the other side extreme. I'm like, you guys are just equally as extreme in many cases. So it is funny how sometimes people think that, like, oh, if you're atheist, that means you're open-minded. It's like, no, you're you can be closed-minded, but you're closed-minded in your ideas, and you're telling somebody else that they're closed-minded, and it's like, well, you're not open to new ideas either. So it's a real issue when people become tribalistic and they plant their flag somewhere, and then they have to defend that team till the end of time. To me, I'm like, I question that's why I love philosophy, because it's like, it's a bunch of questions and very little answers. Like, it's constantly,
Right.
philosophers throughout,
An evolving
and science is
discipline.
yeah.
For sure, science is the same. Yes. And a lot, that's just because of the limit of our capabilities to perceive and comprehend those states, which are scientific absolutes like time. We see time linearly. Time may not necessarily be linear as we experience it. We see the colors that our physical body enables us to see. Not necessarily all of the colors or forms that are there. We're limited by our physical existence. Just like other animals that can't see the things that we do or the colors that we do, they're limited by their physical existence. It's not a difficult concept. There's a lot we don't know and can't know. I find comfort in going to the Bible because I found a lot of things that give me some peace in understanding. Thessalonians, especially in Acts, if you go to Thessalonians 2:2, it says some people will be deceived with a great lie. They won't be able to see what's going on. Several of us ask each other why. All of our colleagues that have done so well academically and in medicine, why don't they see this? It's so clear to me. Here's the chart, here's the data, but they don't see it. There's got to be an explanation for it. And the Bible for me helps me understand that some people just won't see it. And to be there to help those people that don't understand, to try to help them understand is the right thing. We need to pray for the people that not necessarily our loved ones that we hold close, but the people that are most deceived, that can be most harmed. That's who we need to pray for. Pray for your enemies, that they stop with their wicked ways. And I guess I didn't intend to end our conversation on a biblical note, but I'm glad I did because I think it's important.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I'm a big fan of spirituality, and I've become, especially in the last 18 months, even a bigger fan of people who are into spirituality and practice some type of religious practice, because I think it helps them the same way of like philosophy growing up made helped me ask those bigger questions and pump the brakes on my everyday routine in life to be like, hey, wait, like it's really easy to get stuck in the motions, but what's this all about, and what's the purpose, and why am I here, and what, what is really happiness, and what makes me happy, and why does that make me happy, and so I think people need that. They need to ask those questions. And I do remember going to church and as a kid, and the priest would talk about those things. They would say, hey, talk about how important it was to love one another and all that, all these things that morals. I mean, they talk about morals and being a good person. And I think that we can get so caught up in just trying to get ahead and trying to make money and careers and all this stuff that that's not even something you really discuss or think about. It's like, so one of the most important things, like how are you going to be remembered and who you are as a person, and being able to look in the mirror, is something that's neglected. And I think people,
Right. Mm-hmm.
which I think is it's a huge issue. So I love the fact that there's anything out there that can help you. I mean, some of my best friends are Christians, Catholics, and I'm talking about like practicing, not just people who label themselves as these things, but like they go to
Right.
church, they read scripture, I have Muslim friends. It's one of my best friends is Lebanese. I mean, they're some of the best people you've ever met, and it is hard to believe that some of that didn't contribute a little bit, so
Mhm.
I definitely think it's a part of what makes them them, so without a doubt, I think it is important, because people keep saying it, and I do feel like we are in some type of spiritual war. We're in some good versus evil, and
Yeah.
I think some people don't see it, and I hopefully it's not too late when we get people to wake up that, like, hey, like I almost feel like this is one of those great battles that it's gonna be in the history books one day, about good versus evil, and how we need to take down some evil dictator or monarchy.
Pharmakia was talked about in the Old Testament over and over again of being the evil. Yeah. And many times in the New Testament as well. Pharmakia.
So for people listening who want to keep up with what you're doing and your work, and maybe even connect, which social media platforms are you on? Which websites would you direct them towards?
So I got kicked off of LinkedIn for the second time, and they haven't allowed me to be back on again. So now I have Dr. Janci, toxicologist mom. And I forgot to say, that's what I've been doing for the past several years. I've toxicology work. And so Dr. Janci, toxicologist mom on Telegram is, I post scientific studies there. I'm not a blogger. I'm not a huge social media person. I just try to put studies on there. There's some geopolitical content, there's scientific studies, there's the latest things that we're finding with respect to studies like what I talked about with the CDC and other mechanism of action type studies with the vaccines and also with the virus. And so they can find content there. The pregnant women studies that I was citing, and a lot of studies that go against the propaganda narrative, but are real scientific studies that have been done that will help people defend their position to their friends, and also help people that don't believe this, that are on the other side. And I get emails sometimes. I got one that just said, "Stop with your misinformation, you're killing people." So I responded, said, "Hey, give me a call. I'd love to talk to you. Let's talk about which part of what I'm saying you don't agree with, and I'll go over the studies that inform my position." And I'm happy to discuss those studies with you. Let me know where you're coming from. I'll let you know where I'm coming from, and let's compare the data.
I love that, because I'm convinced there's not one person who I couldn't sit down with and we could find some middle ground. Like I mean, I've had Jack Abramoff on my show. I've had which the Casino Jack film was about, the lobbyists. I've had Roger Stone on my show. I've had if you can contribute something to a conversation, then let's talk and let's share ideas and challenge ideas and learn from each other. And I'm the same way. One thing that boggles my mind and really frustrates me is how many people who disagree with us are not willing to have the conversation. They're making a emotional reaction that, like, they get upset. They think we're evil, and because of our actions, people are dying. And then you try to have a discussion about it, and they don't want to have a discussion about what, like you said, what research are you using to get to this conclusion. And I think most of us, if we actually put our differences aside and had a discussion about things, it wouldn't take long before they're like, you know what, you're right, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and you're right, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and we could find some middle ground. Like, we're not the enemy, and it only helps those in power when they're dividing and conquering by getting us all divided, and it helped because we're
absolutely
and
it doesn't have to be vaccinated versus non-vaccinated. We have a treatment that works for the vaccinated and the unvaccinated, so we can stop transmission. Over, done. We don't have to have this debate about new vaccines. A new vaccine isn't going to have any more study behind it than the old new vaccine, right? But we don't need it at all. We have treatments. So use the treatments, they work. Let's just completely remove ourselves from the whole vaccine debate. And if our government wants to have that, wants to mandate that, then we fight back. We don't need the vaccines. We have treatments that work a heck of a lot better than the vaccines. Why would we even use them?
I mean, think about it. Dr. Sanjay Gupta, the face of CNN's,
yeah, I saw that.
got demolished in a debate.
Yeah.
A guy he's a health expert, because we've had a lot of similar people on our shows in regards to the health and nutrition world, and he knows his stuff about health and nutrition. I mean, he's been a health freak his whole life, and Dr. Sanjay Gupta could not defend vaccinating children, couldn't defend vaccinating basically anybody who wasn't really old. And so it's like, if a MMA / comedian / podcaster
right.
couldn't outsmart Joe Rogan, and he's a doctor who's supposed to be deep in this research all the time, then what does that tell you? That tells you then the research that is backing Dr. Sanjay Gupta's opinion isn't very good. And I mean, I think they did a huge benefit to our side by putting him on that show. I think they were really arrogant by thinking like, oh, he's a doctor, he's a PhD, he can go on there and defend this vaccine mandates and all this stuff. And but when the truth is on your side, they didn't realize, like, and so you get somebody who is well spoken and has also done a little bit of research. It doesn't take much to start kind of just taking apart their arguments. And
it doesn't. People need to see that the wiggle words that are used, and they're used a lot in my industry too, in toxicology. So wiggle words or wiggle phrases are when you say something like, it's been shown that that children are more at risk of dying from COVID unvaccinated or unvaccinated than the vaccinated. Okay, so they're not comparing children to children. They're comparing children to all of the deaths. They'll say what they're including is all of the deaths from the beginning, before the vaccines came out. And they've done the same thing in pregnant women. We found it over and over again. It's just a sleight of word, just a sleight. It's not children to children. It's children to the whole entire group. And the way that they do that is they don't say it's children, unvaccinated children to vaccinated children. They say it's unvaccinated children to the vaccinated. So pay attention to wiggle words.
It's like the horse dewormer, like same thing. Like,
oh my gosh,
yeah, it's
yeah.
It's like, well, technically you're correct, but that's not what he took. Can it be a horse dewormer? Yeah.
No, I would argue, in fact, I would argue that its use, if you were to take its use, and I said we should have done this, if you were to take its use globally for all of the different things that it's used for globally and compare it to the amount of use that it has as a horse dewormer, that the human application of ivermectin would far outweigh its use as a anti-parasitic in horses or in cattle or anything. Maybe not by volume, but by actual use per person or per animal. It's been used forever, just along with hydroxychloroquine in South America and Africa on a daily basis. In fact, the CDC still, they hit it on their page. This is the crazy thing too. So the CDC hid the Palenquil hydroxychloroquine guidance for malaria. It used to be right up front as soon as you Googled it. Now you have to go like 3 or 4 layers of pages to find it. They're now recommending another anti-malarial drug over Palenquil, but it's still there. You can still find it. They still recommend it for use in pregnant women and kids. Ivermectin, of course, won the Nobel Prize. It's used for all kinds of things, prevent against river blindness. You can there's a report in Best Cells. It's a go-to thing for toxicology, tome for toxicology. And it was reported that a woman took 1,000 milligrams of ivermectin. 1,000 milligrams. And she did end up in a coma for a few days, but she survived with no untoward after effects. The maximum amount given per day by the protocols that are used by like frontline critical care or something is usually about 50 milligrams. Okay. 1,000 milligrams, 50 milligrams. And yet they say it's so toxic. It's so toxic.
Now let's compare that to the vaccine, because did you hear about the kids who went to Walgreens to get a flu vaccine and they accidentally
my goodness.
Vaccine? Did you hear about this? And
that have cardiomyopathy now? Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like, okay, you can take that much of this drug and basically has no long-term effects. And this, the argument is, oh, well, it was a adult dosage. Well, if adult dosage does that to you, what makes you think a smaller dosage couldn't have a similar type of negative effect on you? It just,
or boosters. And we're warning parents, do not boost your child with any of these. We know what's going. If you got your children vaccinated in the beginning, not knowing the data, we know it now. We expect a cumulative myocarditis effect in these kids. So every shot will be that much more of a risk for them in terms of a heart attack or stroke or pulmonary embolism. And there are kids that have died from heart attack, stroke, and pulmonary embolism from these vaccines alone. Don't let anybody tell you any different. Just go into VAERS. I recommend www.openvaers.com. It's a very easy, searchable VAERS database.
That's Susie.
Yeah.
I know it's
Liz Wellner, I believe.
Yeah, because I know it's Susie Olson's always right on top of the I know, and she's a mutual.
She's great, isn't she? Yeah, you know what's so funny? We're both from Vashon Island. So I'm originally from Vashon Island in the Puget Sound, and so is she. And it's kind of crazy the connections we make over years.
That's awesome. Yeah, she's a sweetheart. She was on with
wonderful.
And I've had her on my show a few times also. She's and again, like many people who are in this community, she's a very motivated mother, and that's the thing. Like a lot of people in this community, there are people who had firsthand experiences with this, and it's not just a bunch of people who listen to conspiracy theories all day long and now think this. It's like people who actually lived it and have tried.
I wasn't even familiar with that community before all this, and I'm so grateful that I've been introduced to the community and that I was able to learn things that I hadn't learned. I'm ashamed to say it. I hadn't looked into it. I trusted that science was done and accepted, and shame on me for not doing the research back then.
Well, I'm sure you were busy with a lot of stuff, and a lot of times we do. I mean, that's the same thing with history. I remember the first time I had Gerard Williams on years ago, who wrote the book The Escape of Adolf Hitler, and Grey Wolf, The Escape of the Adolf Hitler. There's also a documentary that he did. And he was a journalist from the UK, went to Argentina, found a bunch of books written in Spanish that were saying that Hitler made it there. And there was like these huge Nazi German communities in Argentina. He's like, wait, what? He's like, we were told that he died in Germany, and they found his bones, his remains, and he committed suicide. And then he starts looking into it, and he's like, wait. The bones weren't his. They did DNA tests. It wasn't even a male. It was a female. And he's like, wow. He's like, I was just accepting this. And after looking into it, he's like, there's literally zero evidence that he died there. And there's a lot of evidence that he made it in Argentina with Operation Paperclip and all these other things. And so yeah, it's I think
I was aware of that.
yeah. Well, but it's just a example of how we're told something and we just assume somebody did the research, like somebody looked into it. So I'm just going to keep regurgitating it because I'm assuming the research was done and somebody, I'm being told this, so it must be true. So I think this is, just two examples of like, sometimes we need to pump the brakes and be like, okay, let me just not take people's word for it. Let me do my own research. Let me look into it myself. But so we're all guilty of that. So, but thank you so much for all the work you do. I really, really appreciate it. And hopefully we stay connected and we'll talk again soon in the near future.
All right. Absolutely, Ricky. Thank you so much for having me on. And please tell your audience they can contact me anytime. More than happy. J Lindsay at toxicologysupport.com as well, if they want to email me.
Awesome. Yeah. And send me any links that you want in the show description. I'll add them all, including the Telegram thing. I know a lot of people are really enjoying using Telegram because obviously with social media being controlling the algorithms, Telegram's been a good place to get some information in some of these groups. So I'll make sure to put that also in the show description. Thank you so much, Dr. Lindsay. I appreciate your time and we'll keep in touch.
All right. Take care, Ricky. Bye-bye.